Hey everyone, I'm just doing a quick video. I don't even have my regular tripod out because I have got people coming over in about 6 hours, and I'm doing this last minute tablecloth for the dining table. So anyway, this is Robert Kaufman's Essex linen in Flax, I believe is the color. But again, like a couple years ago, I was last minute, made a quick tablecloth, and all I did was serge the raw edges, and it worked beautifully. This is a nice base layer for a table, and then you can put placemats on top and or a table runner, and it looks great. So the table's bigger now because I added the leaves into it, and so I need to make this longer. So what I'm going to do is, I don't have enough of this fabric to make another long size. So just for, because I'm last minute, of course, I cut the amount that I needed, probably like another 22 inches. And again, I serged the raw edges only because I needed to pre-wash this to account for the shrinkage that happened to this one. So now these are virtually the same size. Before, I tried to cut a corner last night, and this fabric unwashed was a good 2.5 inches wider than this fabric. So now that I shrunk it, they're very much more similar in width than they were before. So I'm going to do a flat felled seam. You will see the seam on the table, but again, with everything on top of it, and this is just very casual. This is not anything formal or dressy or anything like that. So I just need this really nice neutral base layer on top of the table. And a flat fell seam will probably be the best option for me with this tablecloth. So, and then I'm also going to do on the edges this time, instead of leaving them, I serged, overlocked, 3-thread, just the raw edges. But when you do that, you don't necessarily have to do it on the selvage edges because they won't ravel like a cut edge will. But now this time I am going to get a little bit more fancy, and I'm going to do a decorative edge wave stitch on the edges to make this have a little bit of pop of color. And this is a really nice fluffy yarn thread for the serger. So I'm going to do like this little two-tone wave stitch. All right, onto the flat felled seam. Okay, so now I am going to pin the new piece onto the existing piece, and I'm pinning them wrong sides together. Yes, wrong sides together. It gets a little confusing, but with a flat felled seam, you're kind of doing it backwards, where your seam allowance is going to be on the right side of the fabric, but then we will be folding that down on itself and doing a top stitch, so it will enclose any raw edges of a seam allowance. So another thing I'll mention here while I'm pinning is that this Robert Kaufman Essex linen fabric is the wider width fabric. It's not the standard quilting width of 43 inches wide. This is the home deck width of 55 inches wide, which is great for a tablecloth because most tables are anywhere between 40 and 44 inches wide. So my table happens to be 42 inches wide. So I'll get a nice drop of the tablecloth over the edges in the perfect length. Because if I had used a 44-inch wide, then I would have to do even more sewing. You would have another seam down the middle so that you could widen your fabric enough to have enough fabric to cover the table and to drop a little bit over the edges. So that's an important thing, and I love that the Essex linen is available in that wider width. All right, so normally I would probably just do a 1/2 inch because this is not a clothing item, but I'm gonna make it as easy as possible. There's a 5/8 inch seam marking on my stitch plate, needle plate, so I'm just gonna go by that to make it go faster instead of having to measure for a 1/2 inch seam allowance and marking it. It's just the little things that make stuff go a lot faster. That was my thread cutter, so I just had to back stitch to keep going again. So now I'm just going to press it. This will set in the stitches. All right. The new piece is still a little bit longer. Before it was twice that size, so it did shrink down a bit. But since it's still pre-shrunk like this one is, when I do the decorative wave stitch, the serger will cut this off. All right, now to finish this, I'm going to press this open, and I'm going to cut down one side of the seam down to 1/4 inch, leaving the other seam the full width. Okay, now we're going to press this over to this side, and then I'm going to wrap it around that 1/4 inch seam and pin it like that, and then I'm going to enclose all of this in a flat seam by edge stitching right next to the fold. This is the stitch that you commonly see on your blue jeans, so take a look at that, and that is what is called a flat felled stitch. But for this purpose of the tablecloth, connecting the two sides, it's really going to work nicely. No raw edges. This is a really cool thing I want to show you. So this is a magnetic with a handle pin cushion, I guess you could call it, and then it'll just pick up what I took out at the sewing machine before. Pretty cool. The other reason why I wanted a flat felled seam is that this tablecloth can be reversed, so it'll be finished on both sides. So just continue to pin and fold over the long seam edge over the short one all the way down. Before you do any decorative stitches or anything on the serger, even on the sewing machine, you should always test it first. And there's different widths and to this wave stitch. So down here I started with a smaller width, which I really like, and I decided to leave this chartreuse colored thread for the needle part, and the back is the light colored and the front is the deeper aqua turquoise ones. And then as it goes to the larger one, it kind of loses its impact. So I went back to the smaller stitch, and I like this the best. So I'm going to do this one on the edge of the tablecloth. The wave stitch is a proprietary stitch to Babylock sergers, and it's not on every Babylock serger. It's more in the mid to high end range machines, and it produces that stitch that I just showed you previously, where it's sort of like a scallopy wave. But you can achieve a similar look with just using a wide 3-thread overlock stitch, and you can still even do a couple of colors. It'll just look a little bit more variegated, and the stitch will be just straight across, kind of like what you're seeing on the screen right now. That's the back side of the wave stitch, and it's just more of a solid color, and you can see a little bit of the green needle color coming through, but it's not a really defined scallop stitch like the Babylock's wave stitch. But if you happen to have a machine that does this stitch, I think it's underutilized. So try to use this stitch. It's really nice. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where this is a little bit over the edge. So I've just drawn a really faint chalk line of where I want the blade to cut, and then it'll line up with that, and I've been cutting off just this little fringe part of the selvage with the decorative wave stitch. Look at how beautiful this is. Oh, it's so gorgeous. All done. That was the fastest part of the whole thing. Now I just turned this plain neutral into something with a wow, with just a little tiny pop of color. I had the added step of adding length to this existing tablecloth, but you can easily make this same tablecloth just from the fresh start of using one piece of fabric, and use the wider width of the 55 inch wide, and it'll be even that much easier to make a beautiful base tablecloth for your dining table. Thanks for watching, and I hope you liked the video. Remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thank you.